afternoon. I think we can make a start now. It's my pleasure to welcome Dr. Julian Edge, who's the Honorary Senior Lecturer, University of Manchester in England. Julian has, drawing on many years, 42 years of experience of TESOL and teacher education, which probably makes him the longest serving educator in the world.
It feels like that sometimes.
He's lived and worked in many countries, including Jordan, Germany, Egypt, Singapore, quite a long time ago, before most of us were actually born, I think.
True.
Turkey, Australia, as well as Britain, where he, I think, currently is working. So without further ado, I'd let Julian carry on and any words of introduction he wants to follow up with. Thank you.
Okay, John, thanks very much for that introduction. I'd like to thank the RELC organization, of course, for inviting me here to talk to you today, especially perhaps if I may single out a couple of people. I'd like to thank Alvin Pang for being the voice and the face of the administration for me as far as this invitation is concerned. I'd like to thank Anwar Talib for his help with the setting up the PowerPoint and the challenges that I faced him with by embedding video into what I think was a rather archaic theme. But I like this old notepad theme. I find it's a nice way of carrying notes around with me. And thank you all, of course, for being here this afternoon as lunch settles. My title is Non-judgemental discourse in the development of critical competencies for language teachers. So my main theme is going to be on this subject of non-judgemental discourse. Let me lay out one thing very clearly before I start. I'm sure I'll say it again. I'm not talking about a way of teaching. I'm talking about a way of being a teacher. And I'm talking about a way of self-development for teachers through working with colleagues. That's my topic. As the theme of the seminar is this idea of the development of critical competencies for language teachers in the 21st century, I'd like to start by picking out some key terms and concepts from the seminar rationale and commenting on them before I come on to my main theme. So, first, I'd like to look at some themes from the seminar rationale. On that basis, I'd like to establish a dual goal in terms of how I see moving forward in terms of our theme. And then of those two goals I'm going to lay out, I'd like to focus in on one particular way of moving forward, and that's where the idea of non-judgmental discourse will come in. When I say one way, let me say again, as with any way, there's never just one way. There's no one correct way. There's no way that will suit everybody. There are different ways. This is one that particularly intrigues and motivates me. Seminar themes, then. Cultural sensitivity was an important theme. And culture has been mentioned on a few occasions in these talks. I'd like to make a couple of comments. One is, it's also dangerous when we speak of culture to lump together millions of people as though they were one mono lump. You know, to speak of Indians, Singaporeans, Californians, as though they were one single lump. They're not. They're also full of individuals. The work that I'll be talking about in this session that I'm doing at the moment with friends and colleagues, that group includes someone from Uruguay, someone from Finland, someone from Japan, someone from Turkey. They are individuals coming out of cultures who also have their ways that suit them and ways of developing. Another point about cultural sensitivity is that certainly my work comes out of a certain cultural background. And what I want to do today is to report on report on work that I've been involved in with friends and colleagues over the years This is what we have done. The extent to which that is useful to you, I leave you to evaluate. That is my view of cultural sensitivity. I am not here to recommend that you do things that we did. I'm here to report on what we have done so that you can evaluate whether or not that seems useful to you. Core values. Certainly my work is expressing values that are my core values. I don't see them as any more core than anyone else's values. Once again, that's up to you to decide the extent to which the values expressed here seem meaningful and useful to you. Same kind of thing with humanistic attitudes. I'm certainly interested in exploring what it means to be a human being on this planet, taking a human perspective, in that that's the only perspective that I have available as a human being on this planet. That's my perspective. I offer it for your evaluation and for your judgment on usefulness. Development. When I talk about development in this talk, I mean particularly self-development. The idea of the individual as somebody, well, take myself. Lots of people can train me and lots of people can educate me. And I need that training and I need that education. But nobody can develop me. I develop. It's an intransitive verb, or it's a reflexive verb. I develop myself. That's what I mean by development. Teacher self-development. The term critical has several meanings. The one I particularly want to highlight and focus on is the idea of always questioning, never quite satisfied, always wanting to go out a little different than we came in, and particularly perhaps in relation to issues of power and authority, always wanting to know exactly why things are the way they are, because they are certainly not the way they are by accident. They are the way they are because of certain power structures and the influence that they put out, always to be questioned. And in terms of questioning, the term competencies, which for me is a kind of a working synonym of skills, competencies are certainly clearly very important. The danger of the term, I find, is that competencies can be listed and listed and listed, and frequently are, and those lists become ever longer, and the demands put upon teachers become ever greater, until in the end, they have to be ignored because they become too onerous to be realistic. Another thing about lists of competencies is that lists themselves are static. And a point that Henry Widdowson made in the early 1980s when we were all discussing communicative competence is that communicative competence at the time was divided up into skills, and then sub-skills, and then micro-skills, until these skills ran on literally into the hundreds. And the point that Widdowson made then was that more important than this potentially endless list of static skills is to develop a certain capacity, a capacity to use those skills, a capacity to go on learning, a capacity for growth in terms of what one is faced with. So I'm differing here from points made by Andy Hargreaves in the keynote when he questioned the use of capacity because of the way that it has been interpreted. I prefer to stay with capacity in the sense of a readiness to learn, a readiness to grow, a readiness to use the skills that one has got and the competencies that one has got and to learn from them. And while Professor Hargreaves introduced this concept of capital, I've not read his latest book, but I would, in terms of sharing ideas here, want to raise doubts about what comes trailed along behind the idea of capital. I take the implicit reference to Bourdieu, but capitalism brings its own resonances. And when we start to talk about capital and how we can leverage capital, I think we run the danger of people thinking if you talk like a neocon, perhaps you're also going to behave like a neocon. And that there are dangers there if you take on the metaphors of other people, that you will perhaps understood to be a part of those other people. And that sort of thinking, for me, resonates with a banking concept of education, the kind of banking concept that we've been warned against for so long by Freire, for instance, and which seems to me to be very much counter to the sort of approach to education that Professor Hargreaves himself has spoken and written so eloquently about. Technology, clearly important. Among the challenges that we face going into the 21st century. And technology, and the use of technology, I would say, is in fact an integral part of what it means to be a human being. Living with technology is what being a human being has always meant. I'd refer you to this line from Ronald Wright's book, A Short History of Progress. From the first chipped stone to the first smelted iron took 3 million years. From the first iron to the hydrogen bomb took only 3,000. And the point I take from that is that change will continue to come at us at an increasing rate. How we access information, what we understand learning to be, is now very different, I think, if we compare my understanding of how to access information compared to school children today and how they access information. And the very idea of what learning is and how we get our hands on information and what we do with it, these ways of learning can't be turned off at the school gate if school children's respect for education and teachers is to be maintained. I really can't imagine what it is like to be a 50-year-old teacher faced day in, day out with classrooms full of 15-year-old students and the way they respond to technology and how they live with technology. This seems to me to be the major existential challenge that teachers face on a regular basis. And how they are to respond seems to me to be almost frightening. I've got two ideas. Myself as a teacher of a very late adopter type of digital technology use, when I'm faced with the digital natives, I have to show myself as a co-learner. That's to say, no matter what level of technology I'm working at, I at least have to show myself ready to learn, ready to be a learner in the same way that they are, even if their level of technology use is much higher than mine. A bigger challenge, it seems to me, is that teachers are going to have to learn to be facilitators of learning beyond their own competence as users of technology, somehow trying to orchestrate the use of technology on the basis of what can be done with it without being able perhaps to do it oneself. And that's going to be a massive challenge to pedagogy as the changes of technology come at us ever faster. And in that situation, it seems to me that it's going to be as much a question of one's personal capacity to go on learning as it is going to be a question of a list of competencies, because that list will continue to increase at an ever faster rate. It's going to be as much a question of the kind of person you want to be as it is going to be a question of the skills you can learn. It's going to be as much a question of developing an idea of internal growth as it's going to be a question of copying external models. And I'd like to point out as well, I'm saying as much a question of, not more than. This isn't a displacive argument saying that competencies are not important, skills are not important, external. Of course they are important, but it's going to be as much a question of these other issues. So one element of a way forward, it seems to me, and this is a question of pedagogic capacity, is going to be an extension of pedagogic capacity to include some version of ongoing reflective practice or ongoing action research. The kind of work that Tom Farrell was talking about in this room yesterday. And if I can link up again with an idea that Tom put out into the room. He said, remember, reflective practice is not for you, actually it's for your students, if I've got that right. He nodded. I'd like to take up a different position. This is not an argument with Tom. This is a reminder that we live in a world of multiple realities. That's the one that Tom lives in. I live in a slightly different reality. I would say no. Reflective practice is for you. It is not for your students. Your education was for your students. Your training was for your students. Your development is for you because you are large, because you contain multitudes, because you are worth it, because the growth and the learning and the expression that you can find through this work will enrich you, and it's for you. And your students will benefit, but it's for you. And the question in this reflective practice approach to our work is not the old one of, oh, I tried it, did it work? The important question is not even, is that true? The driving question is always, what have I learned from this? That's always the question we need to be asking ourselves, whether things worked or didn't work. What have I learned from this? That's stressing pedagogic capacity. And now I'm coming into the second element of my focus, and this is the one I want to take forward. Combined with an extension of communicative capacity to include a mastery of non-judgmental discourse. Not as a way to teach, but as a way of supporting teacher learning. And now I'm coming into the key focus of my talk. This is the area of my work that's been motivating me, getting me out of bed, making me excited for the last 25 of those 42 years. And it still does. Enough of that. Cooperative development. I mean the individual's self-development in cooperation with a colleague or with colleagues. Because individual development is a social process. It is not the case that we are born individuals and then learn to be social. We grow in our mothers. We are born from our mother. We are totally dependent on our caretakers. We are born social. And then we learn to be independent. And then, if all goes well, we learn to be interdependent. And that's where this work is based, in the interdependence of the individual and one's society and one's group. How does this individual development take place? Well, let's go back to how learning takes place anyway. We learn, I think it's fair to say, intellectually. We learn through our intellect. We know that. We learn, if we work on it, through experience. Sometimes we just have experience, but if we work at it, we also learn through experience. We learn intellectually and we learn experientially. The curse of teacher education, as far as I know, down through the ages and all around the planet, is that these two things stay separate. The cry is always, what they taught me in my lectures isn't the same as what happens in the classroom. What we learn intellectually, what we learn experientially, doesn't always match up, and that's where a lot of confusion comes in. But we know these two forms of learning do take place. We learn differently and we hold the learning differently. Just two examples. Intellectually, I know why a light bulb glows when you turn the electricity on. Experientially, I know what it's like to be called daddy. I learned those two things very differently. I know them very differently. I hold them in different ways. What I want to say now is that there's a third way of learning that we don't use enough. And that is through articulation of our ideas or expression of our ideas. And I put both words there because when I talk about articulation of our ideas, it sounds more intellectual. And when I say expression, it sounds more affective or emotional. And I want to bring them both together. Because when I am asked to express what I know or what I think or what my opinions are, I am obliged to bring together what I've learned intellectually and what I've learned experientially in order to say my own truth. And when I try to tell you what I think about something or what I plan to do, it's not the case that that planning is already all there in my head and I just bring it out through my mouth. It is in the speaking that I also take my thinking forward. And this links up with what we heard this morning about Vygotskian thought. The idea that taking the energy of thought and bringing it out into the matter of language so we can see it and hear it and grasp it also feeds back into the energy of our thinking. So, given a chance to articulate and express our ideas, we can bring together our intellectual learning and our experiential learning, bring them together and take them forward. So that kind of development that comes through articulation and expression comes through what I want to call non-defensive speaking. The way you can talk when you know nobody's going to criticize you, nobody's going to argue with you, they're just going to say, come on, tell me more, tell me more. What else have you got to say? Tell me more. When the pressure is on you, not to argue, but to actually take your thinking forward. That's what's being demanded of you. And under those circumstances, you have the opportunity for exploration, to explore your ideas freely. And during that exploration is the possibility. This is not a mechanical algorithm. It doesn't always happen. But there is the possibility for discovery, for you to discover an idea of your own, not a suggestion that someone traveled halfway around the world to tell you, not a suggestion of something that somebody else did, but something you've worked out for yourself, and that you can commit to. And that is worth trying out. And that is worth holding on to. Because in that discovery, you might find the basis for your own future action, your own next best step. And that's what you're looking for. Your own next best step that will be your development, not anybody else's. I want to give you a brief example of such a discovery. Let me tell you about Sue. Sue was teaching English at an agricultural faculty in Italy during the 2003 invasion of Iraq. And in the context of that invasion, led, as you might remember, by the USA, Britain, and Australia, the three countries that lead the teaching of English around the world, the USA, Britain, and Australia, she wanted to bring into her teaching to her students some socio-political awareness of the way English works around the world, works in its role as dominator as well as educator. And that's what she wanted to explore, this idea of how can I do more of that in my work. Now, the content of what she says isn't that important. What I want you to listen out for is that moment in her exploration where she says something like, actually, come to think about it. And it's at that moment, as she's exploring her ideas, she has this moment of discovery. And that's a discovery that will become important to her as she moves towards action. No. I'm having a moment here, but there we go. I had my late adopter moment there. This takes a moment to load. Here we go.
It was easy to be against.
Nope.
It was easy to be against the war in Italy because everybody was against it. So that was a very easy thing to do. On the other hand, though, you see, although nobody talked about anything else, it was only one group out of 3 that actually brought up this with me. And then it happened simply because one of the students is politically very active, and he asked me if I wanted to buy a peace flag. And I said, oh, well, I've already got one. So that was, and after that, every time they asked me about it, and they asked me and they wanted to talk about it. But actually it was very much, come to think of it though, it was always very much separated from the lesson. It never kind of became part of the English teaching. That was all of us actually as people, as individuals, as people, rather than in the kind of teaching. So maybe I'm not comfortable. Maybe I wouldn't ever be comfortable with sort of going in and saying to them, right, today we're not going to do GM foods, we're going to talk about the war in Iraq. Or I don't think I would be comfortable doing something like that. So maybe it does go back to kind of the bigger picture, even bigger than just sort of huge episodes like these, of maybe what I can do is just sort of slowly chip away by presenting alternative views, by maybe challenging their views, just slowly, a little bit at a time.
That's the kind of thing I mean by a moment of discovery during exploration. And what you saw there was a group of us who worked together a few years ago at Aston University, where we would meet with 3 understanders working in this mode. And you heard Sue doing what we call non-defensive speaking. And how is that non-defensive speaking to be facilitated? Well, by non-judgmental understanding. And that's based on 3 principles. First of all, a principle of respect. That's to say, if I am understanding you, I offer you my respect for you to say whatever you want to say, for you to think what you want to think. I'm going to put my opinions, my experience out of my head and concentrate on understanding you out of a sense of respect for you to have your ideas, your opinions, your plans as yours. I'm going to try to do more than only offer you my respect and my acceptance. I'm going to offer you my empathy. That's to say, I'll do my very best to see things the way you see them, to understand things from your perspective. And I'm going to do both those things with sincerity. That's to say, I'm not just pretending to respect you and pretending to empathize with you so that later maybe I can slyly suggest to you what you really ought to be doing so I can help you. That's not what I'm there for. I'm there sincerely to respect you and empathize with your point of view to encourage your exploration. Those are the principles that non-judgmental understanding are based on. And then there's a set of, let's call them skills, I want to talk you through. I have to talk you through in a certain sequence because I can't say them all at once. But I don't want to suggest that they are done in a sequence. They can be done in any sequence as required. The first thing that's required all the time is the skill of attending. That's to say, paying attention to the person that you're understanding, with eyes and face and body and gesture and heart and mind and spirit, to make the speaker feel well listened to. That's the first thing that's offered. Second, the skill of reflecting. That's to say, after listening for a while, the understander is going to say, just a minute, let me see if I've got this right. What you are saying is, and then you reflect back to the speaker what you've understood them to say. You reflect back to them not just the content of what they've said, but perhaps also the emotion that you're picking up as well, the feeling behind it. Let me give you a brief example of reflecting, and now we'll see if I've learned from my last experience on playing this one. As coincidence would have it, this person's name is also Sue, but it doesn't really matter. The last time Sue was speaker, her topic was her work-life balance and trying to get them in order. This time, what she wants to talk about is the fact that she's got a promotion, she's got a new job, and she wants to talk about the relationship between her old job and her new job. But she starts out by saying, I know what I talked about last time, don't think I'm going there. That's not what I'm talking about this time. And then one of the understanders comes in to reflect that, to make sure that we've got it right. So you'll hear the reflection, and because the reflection is accurate, then Sue feels encouraged to carry on talking about what she wants to talk about. Just takes a second to load.
The fact that I don't want to talk about that aspect is because if any understanders think I'm going there, you're mistaken, I'm not. So we won't try and go in that direction.
Okay, so can I just summarise what I think you've been saying, that you want to talk about your new job and how it relates to the present job that you're doing at the moment, but not in terms of practicality, not in terms of how it affects your day-to-day life.
That's right, yeah. I want to talk about it conceptually. What conceptually are the matches between that job and this job, and how I can make the cross-fertilisation as rich as possible. So because I think that in the best case, each job can enrich each other. And I haven't had much time to think about what the connections are. So that's what I'd like to focus on.
That's a reflection where the reflection is accurate and encourages the speaker to continue. We'll look at other effects of reflection later on, because reflection, the ability to show somebody you've carefully understood them by giving it back to them, is the central skill of non-judgmental understanding. Another skill is what we call focusing. That's to say, after a while, the understander might say, okay, you've talked about X, and you've talked about Y, and you've talked about Z. Is there anything in what you've said so far you think you'd like to go into in more depth? And the purpose of this is that, remember, we want to move towards action. This is action-oriented work. And talk can remain general, whereas action can only be specific. So what we're trying to do is to encourage the speaker to find a focus, to go into some aspect of what they're talking about in more depth, in the belief that in that specific focus, we will start to move towards action. So the understander's giving a gentle sort of a push without suggesting what it is that the speaker might concentrate on. And the speaker retains the right to say, no, I don't want to focus on any of that yet. I want to keep on talking in this way, because the speaker is in charge of her own self-development. Another possible skill is what we call thematizing. That's to say, I hear you saying this now, and earlier you said why. Is that right? Have I got that right? Are those ideas connected at all? And this is an intuitive kind of move from the understander's point of view, thinking, is there a connection between this and that? And the speaker might say, yes, of course there is. Or the speaker might say, I don't know. And there might be a connection the speaker hadn't thought of before. Or the speaker might say, no, absolutely not. I'm not talking about that, and go on to what they want to talk about. But again, the understander is raising possibilities without giving direction. And this idea of possible connections also has a flip side in what we call challenging, where the understander might say, I hear you saying X at this point, and I'm not sure how that fits with what I understood before when you were saying Y. Have I got those 2 points right? So the understander is challenging the speaker, but only with what the speaker herself has already said. And for the speaker, these 2 points might be completely coherent, in which case he can explain why. But there might be an incoherence which the speaker hadn't noticed before. Or there might be a situation where the speaker hadn't thought that for some people these two ideas don't fit together very well. I remember once, for instance, saying, as a teacher, I will support any way of learning that the learner finds useful. And later in the same session, I said, before exams, I see the students walking up and down the corridors, memorizing all this stuff, and I wish they wouldn't waste their time like that. And my understander said to me, just a minute, Julian, a few minutes ago you said you'll support anything the learner finds useful. And now you're saying, I wish they wouldn't waste their time like that. I mean, how do these two things fit together? Difficult. Maybe I'll tell you how another time. It's a challenge. Out of this talk, out of this exploratory talk, we're looking for a discovery. If the speaker makes a discovery, we're looking for the idea of a goal. So coming out of what you've said so far, can you see a clear goal that you'd like to set for yourself? Let's take a look at a bit more data. The previous data, as I said, was a group approach to cooperative development that we ran when I worked at Aston University. This is one-on-one work where the speaker has taken on a new role where she used to be a teacher. She's now also a teacher supervisor, so she has supervision duties. And she's been talking about how difficult it is to get on with her own work when people keep coming and bringing her problems to sort out for them. And so the understander says, so the feeling you have is that you want to be able to take on a piece of work, get it done, and move on to the next thing. Yes. You know your work experience now isn't like that because people come and give you things you can't ignore. That's right. And the speaker has explained that what she wants to do is to set aside a certain part of her day when people can come, and she wants to prioritize their problems when they bring them in so that she can have a biggest problem first, smallest problem last, and fit them into a certain time of her day. So the understander says, and you're looking to try to make the situation better by having a way of prioritizing what people give you and a clear time slot of the day so you match them up. Is that right? And the speaker says, yes, it all sounds very... as I listen to you, it makes me think maybe I'm looking at it the wrong way. Maybe really I should be attacking more my own expectations. And this is perhaps the most powerful use of reflection, when the understander reflects back to the speaker what she said, and when she gets that chance to see it and hear it again, she says, yes, that is what I said, but that doesn't sound really so good anymore. And what she sees is, I was thinking of that as an unsolvable thing because of just who I am, but maybe that's a clearer path to feeling more satisfied about what I'm doing, because maybe what I'm doing is actually okay. And what she gets to see is that in this new role, all these interruptions, they are her job. They are her responsibilities. This is not her job being interrupted. This is what her job has become, taking care of the problems that other people bring to her. And what she needs to do is to change her attitude towards that and to gain satisfaction from it and see her work in a different way. So it's not a plan of action that she needs so much as a change of attitude. And that's what she discovers by having her plan reflected back to her. When somebody has developed a goal, we get onto this idea of trialing. That's to say, okay, if that is the goal, do you want to work on how you're going to get there, what you're actually going to do? So let's try out your ideas of how you're going to get to where you want to get to. Let me give you an example of that. We've got a situation here where the teacher teaches elementary school children. And he says, they never get the homework right. There's always this mess about they didn't understand the homework and what to do, and they don't do the right things. And he's been talking about this problem. And that's the goal he's set himself, to find a way of making the homework clear so the kids all do the right homework. And he comes around to this idea of perhaps if I could write it on the board and say, this is what you have to do. And then they could follow. They could write it down. They could copy it down. Yes, maybe that's a good idea, to stop the confusion caused by the oral explanation of the instructions. Now, you might say, writing the homework on the board is not a great breakthrough in world educational terms. But in terms of this teacher, with his problem, in this class, this was his next best step. And that's what we're all looking for, our next best step. And what the understander picked up here was also interesting. Oh, so you think the confusion is caused by the oral explanation of the instructions? Certainly as a major part. Yeah, I think it is. I think that's right. I need to try it. I do write on the board sometimes, but I'm not consistent. Maybe that's the problem then. I'm not consistent about it, and they don't know what to expect. That could be a discovery there. And he laughs because he's using discovery in cooperative development terms. And I think another important point here is that he doesn't only learn a next best step for solving one practical problem, he gets a deeper insight into himself as a teacher. He's not consistent teaching very young children. He doesn't give them a regular pattern of what to respond to. And that's a much deeper discovery he makes about himself that's going to take his development forward. I want to show you this bit of video because this work, I've given you a practical teaching example. This work is also used in more conceptual terms. That's to say, clarifying conceptual thinking. This is a slightly longer clip taken from a workshop, so the camera angle's not so good. But there's a workshop going on, and I've asked for someone to come forward as a volunteer and talk about what they'd like to talk about. And Olga, the teacher researcher here, is talking about her intercultural research and how important she's found it to try to find a way of understanding other people's positions rather than only working from her own position. And I want you to listen to my attempt to reflect back to her what she's saying, because I have 3 goes, and each time my reflection isn't quite accurate enough for her. And so that's the third power of reflection. When it's not accurate, it gives the speaker a chance to hear it and to get a little bit closer to exactly what she wants to say and have it understood. She begins by saying, in my personal experience, back in Belarus, which is where Olga's from. Just takes a moment to
From
learn.
my personal experience, like when I was back in Belarus, just in my own culture, just in my own social status, all of other people thought in the same way as me, and it was very easy to communicate with other people. But then when I moved abroad and I started to meet other people, I think there was a kind of a time when it was like if other people think in this way, here's my position, and what you think is wrong, like if you don't think the same way. And when it was some time ago, it's not something new, there was a time when it's just changed, and like these people are coming from different place.
Right.
These people have their own experience, they have their own values, and seeing people as people first, accepting their position, looking from their point of view, and I think it helped me to start being able to communicate with other people much better, to understand them better, and I started learning a lot from them. And it's not like me, the right. These people are the right, and there's so much interesting going on.
Right,
Can learn.
right.
And it's important for language teaching, because language teaching is always in intercultural context. It's important for any intercultural communication, including research as well.
Right, so you started off because you're in a common context with other people.
Yeah.
it was easy to understand. And then when you met people from other places, the original, your first response is to judge them as right or wrong, depending on where you're coming from. And
Not exactly where you're coming from, just not even thinking that you're coming from a different place. I know you're right.
Right. Okay, you don't have to think of where you're coming from because that's given, that's the place.
Yeah.
Everything else is different.
Yeah, everything what is different is just, it doesn't exist. You're not living in the right
You don't
place.
think of yourself as, I'm in one place, they're in another. You think, I am the center.
You assume that the whole world sees the world in the same way as you see, and if they do something differently, it's just because they misunderstood the world.
Right. Yeah.
And then moving into another position, looking from that other point of view, you just start to see that the world is very plural.
And you said that's when you start to see people as fully rounded people who come along with exactly the same right to their opinions and their differences and their values as you bring. And that's when you start to get this relative sense.
And I think from that time, first I started to learn a lot for everything, because it was the same idea going with me, and I was just rejecting everything what was coming. And the moment that I started to accept and think, and I started questioning myself, where the most ideas started to come.
Right. So it's that acceptance that's actually opened you up to a lot more learning.
Yeah.
Because you can accept that this whole person will have good reason for believing this or doing that or thinking the other, and maybe there's something I can learn from that.
Yes.
And you said also that foreign language teaching is necessarily an intercultural exchange, and so that kind of openness and acceptance needs to be a part of language teaching as well.
Exactly, because people who learns a foreign language, somebody from a different culture, somebody from a different place, and if you don't have this plurality of ideas, you just come and impose your right. And when you do in such way, there is no that respect, that acceptance of these people who are with you, and you can't build good relationship out of that. It's like there is a mismatch.
Right.
You need first accept, and then out of this relationship you can.
Right. It's not as though you first evaluate before you decide to accept. First of all, you must accept it all.
Yes.
And then you can learn.
Yes.
From the difference. Yeah.
So I would absolutely. This is you pronounced the idea that I had in my mind. Yes. First, what you need to accept. What is that?
There's that moment when the speaker says, "Yes, you've just said what I've got in my mind." That's what you're working for as an understander. That's when you feel, yes, we've got there. And the key outcome for Olga was that she'd felt she'd been going round in circles, but that she pins down this concept of acceptance of the whole person as fundamental to her research into intercultural communication. And the reason I put that heading up there is that, again, for me, this is just another metaphor, I think I've used it before, of how this works. The energy of thought has been solidified, give or take a spelling mistake, into the matter of language, allowing her to see it, hear it, grasp it, and this will feed the energy of her future thought. And there's just one more moment I'd like to play to you from this. There's feedback here after that cooperative development session when I asked Olga, did it make any difference? Sorry. You see, I learned and then I forgot. Learning, isn't it wonderful? Did it make any difference to
It made my ideas clearer.
Yeah?
Just talking, like, I think I was going in rounds and circles and jumping from a little bit from one topic to another. But by the end, I think it became a little bit clearer what they wanted to say, what I meant.
Okay, thanks. Yeah.
And I could pronounce it in more one word.
One word.
Like before it was like, and then the end is like acceptance.
Okay, that was a sort of an insight. It boiled down to that one word, and that's a concept that you can take out of it. I think that's really powerful, in fact, because that in a sense, that is an example of this process I suggested of exploration, which sometimes leads to a discovery. And that discovery might be, I need to give the students more homework, or the discovery might be something in terms of practical teaching procedure, or it might be conceptual. That's helped me to nail down a concept that I can use. Thanks. Finally, the speaker, the understander, step out of that speaker-understander relationship in order to plan the next session. Shall we fix the time and place for the next meeting? Because this kind of approach works best if it's kept up regularly, at least until people find that they take into it, it's useful to them, they know how to work together. Clearly, it's a kind of work that needs trust, but it's also the kind of work that builds trust and builds collegiality as people get to know each other. And when one does have this set of skills, it's also possible just to knock on somebody's door and say, have you got 10 minutes? I need you to understand me, which is what my colleagues and I now do. In terms of our own next meeting, for those interested, then in room 603, 604 at 15:40, there'll be a conversation based on this session and my colleague Lindsay Miller's session, if anybody wants to be there. At 9 a.m. tomorrow morning, I'll be running a workshop of the kind you saw a clip from on how to do the stuff I've been talking about. If anybody wants to... this book isn't totally about cooperative development, but it includes my work in cooperative development. This was my last book. This was the 42 years worth. But if you really want to go back to the source of this style of thinking, this way of being, then A Way of Being by Carl Rogers would be a good place to go, because all the work I've been talking about today arises conceptually from Carl Rogers' work in person-centered education. That's my address. I'm running a one-man campaign to try to introduce the term address. It's not catching on, but there you go. If anybody wants to try this work out and wants to get in touch with me about it, I'd be delighted to hear from you and would respond. And that is the end of the notebook. I've run a little over time, I'm afraid. Thank you very much indeed for your patience.
Thank you, Julian. If you want to come over here. We've got about 5 minutes left for any questions. Please raise your hand if anybody has a question. Can you just come to the microphone, please, because we really wouldn't be able to hear you from there.
Thank you very much. I would like to clarify my own understanding. If I'm not mistaken, you are going to say that communicative competence as one of the competencies of teachers should be extended into the mastery of judgmental discourse, meaning that we have to, let's say, understand without making judgment and to show non-defensive speaking, etc. And I would like to share with you my own understanding of the dimensions of human being. In my country, we have a character education, so we talk about developing holistic human being in the sense that human being has a lot of dimensions, like academic dimension, emotional dimension, etc. And are you saying that this is a kind of non-academic dimension that should be possessed by teachers in order to be competent in performing their profession? So I'm trying to compare. And
Could I come in there? Actually, I'd like to say something, if I may, just before you continue.
Okay.
Only in the sense that at the beginning of your question, you asked me if I was saying what you should do and what you have to do. And I'd like to make it clear, I am in no way saying anything that you should do or anything that you have to do. I am reporting on some things that I have done and other teachers have done that we have found useful. And whether or not you find it useful would be for you to judge. I have no position on whether or not you should do it.
Okay, but indirectly you show us good things to learn, at least. Okay, I'm going to say that the values that you value are different from those that I value. So we have some dimensions that we share and we do not share. Is it this attitude of, let's say, non-judgmental discourse, does it something that we do not share? So which is sensitive culturally, so we have different cultures, so we are different, not something which is bad or good, just different, and therefore we have to avoid of making judgment. What do you think?
All I can really do is speak out of my own values and ask you to speak out of yours, and we can decide whether or not we share those values, which ones we do or don't. Let me say again, nothing I have said is meant to be an argument against the importance of discussion, against the importance of disagreement, against the importance of arguing. All these things are important too. What I've been trying to demonstrate is that there is another way of collaborating, of cooperating, which is not in our usual academic mode of you tell me your opinion and I'll try and defeat you with my opinion and you try to argue me out of your opinion because of my opinion. You know, that is also important because ideas are tried out and tested, and that I wouldn't want to lose that. Actually, I argue quite a lot when I argue. But I think we can extend our repertoire of communication in this direction